The boardroom on the 42nd floor of Han River Tower was the kind of room that made ordinary people feel small. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the glittering spine of Seoul at night, the Han River cutting through the city like a silver scar, beautiful and indifferent. The furniture was Italian. The silence was deliberate. And standing at the center of it all, in a simple black dress that cost less than the pen on the conference table, was a Nigerian woman who had just done something that no one in this building had ever dared to do. She slid a document across the table. Not nervously. Not apologetically. She pushed it forward the way a chess player moves a queen, with full awareness of what the move meant. Kim Seo-Jun did not pick it up immediately. He sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit, one hand resting flat on the surface, his face arranged into that particular expression he had perfected over years of boardroom warfare, the one that revealed absolutely nothing. He was 34 years old, the heir to one of South Korea's most powerful conglomerates, and in every room he had ever walked into, he was the most dangerous person present. But he was looking at her like he was not entirely sure that was still true. He glanced at the document, then back at her face. Then, slowly, he picked it up. It was a pregnancy report, issued from a private clinic in Mapo district. The mother's name was listed as Adaeze Nwokolo. The date was 3 days ago. And every number on that report, every medical figure, every carefully formatted detail, was completely and expertly fabricated. The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled too tight. And then she spoke. "I am not here because I want to be," Adaeze said. Her voice was steady, calm in the way that people are calm when they have already survived the worst thing that could happen to them. "I am here because you need something and I need something, and for the next 6 months, those two things can work together." Seo-Jun set the document down. "You understand," he said quietly, "that if anyone in this family discovers this arrangement, the consequences for you will be severe." She did not blink. "I understand," she said. "Do you understand that I am the only person in Seoul right now who is willing to sit across from you and have this conversation?" Something shifted in his eyes. Not warmth. Not admiration. Something closer to recognition. The look of a man who has spent his whole life surrounded by people performing loyalty and has just encountered someone performing nothing at all. He reached for the second document on the table. The contract. 41 pages. He had had his legal team work through 3 nights to draft it. "If you sign this," he said, "you will move into my residence within the week. You will attend every public function I attend. You will give interviews when required. You will behave at all times as my wife. And you will never, under any circumstances, speak about the nature of this arrangement to anyone." "I know what I signed up for," she said. "You don't," he replied. "Not cruelly. Just factually. Not yet." And somewhere on the other side of Seoul, in a townhouse in Yongsan-gu, an older woman was sitting at a desk lit by a single lamp. Her name was Han Mira. She was 63 years old, the sister of Seo-Jun's late father, and she had spent the last 4 decades making sure the Han family name remained untouchable. She was looking at a photograph that had been taken outside the clinic in Mapo district 3 days ago, by a man she paid very generously to notice things other people missed. The woman in the photograph was young, Nigerian, and she was carrying a folder that contained documents from inside a clinic she had no medical reason to visit unless she was a patient. Han Mira picked up her phone. "Find out everything," she said to the voice on the other end. "Start in Nigeria." She set the phone down and looked at the photograph again. "Who are you?" she whispered. Cut to black. "Before we go any further into this story, I have to pause and ask you something. Where in the world are you watching this from right now? Seriously, drop it in the comments because it never stops being remarkable to me how far these stories reach. If you are new here, please subscribe right now because you do not want to miss how this one ends. Trust me. Alright, now let us go all the way back to the beginning, because to understand what Adaeze Nwokolo was doing in that boardroom, you need to understand what brought her to Seoul in the first place, and what she was running from when she got there. Adaeze Nwokolo grew up in Enugu, in a family that had money the way old trees have roots, quietly, deeply, and with a history attached to it that nobody talked about at dinner. Her father, Chief Emeka Nwokolo, was a man who wore his influence the way some men wear cologne, present in every room before he entered it. He had built his fortune through contracts and connections that stretched from the Niger Delta to the National Assembly, and he had 3 daughters and the specific brand of Nigerian patriarch ambition that meant each of those daughters was, in some way, an asset to be deployed. Adaeze was the middle daughter. The quiet one. The one who had gone to study nursing in Lagos against her father's preference, who had taken a job at a private hospital in Ikoyi against his advice, and who had earned a placement at a Korean medical exchange program against his explicit instruction. She was 27 when she arrived in Seoul for the first time, wide-eyed and exhausted from the 18-hour journey, carrying 2 suitcases and a determination to build something that was entirely her own. Seoul did not welcome her warmly at first. The city was fast and cold and entirely certain of itself, and Adaeze spent the first 3 months feeling like a person standing outside a glass building, watching everyone inside move with a confidence she had not yet earned. Her Korean was functional but not fluent. Her colleagues at the medical center were polite but distant. She ate a lot of ramen alone in her small apartment in Mapo and called her younger sister Chidinma every Sunday night just to hear a voice that did not require translation. But Adaeze was not the kind of woman who stayed outside for long. She learned. She adapted. She studied the language with the same focused intensity she had brought to her nursing boards, and by her second year, she was holding conversations that surprised people, navigating the city with the ease of someone who had decided to belong there whether the city agreed or not. She made friends, a Senegalese graduate student named Fatou, a Korean nurse named Park Ji-yeon who found Adeeze's directness refreshing in a workplace full of careful indirection. She found a rhythm. And then, 14 months after she arrived, she received a phone call from Enugu that broke it. Her father's voice on the phone was not the voice of a man asking. It was the voice of a man informing. "There is a man," he said, "whose family has been in discussion with ours for some time. He is from a good family. The arrangement is favorable. You will come home in the next 2 months to meet him." Adaeze sat very still on her bed in Mapo, phone pressed to her ear, looking at the water stain on her ceiling that she had been meaning to report to the landlord. "Daddy," she said carefully, "I am in the middle of a program. I have a contract here." "Contracts can be ended," he said. "You are 28 years old, Adaeze. There are things that matter more than a nursing program in a foreign country." She knew, even then, that it was not really a conversation. Her father did not have conversations. He had announcements, and then he had the slow, patient, economically devastating process of making those announcements into reality. She had seen what happened to her older sister Ngozi, who had resisted for 8 months before the combination of financial pressure, family shame, and sheer exhaustion had brought her to the altar of a man she had met 4 times. Adaeze was not Ngozi. But she was also not naive enough to think that wanting to be different from Ngozi was enough to make it so. She told her father she would think about it. She hung up the phone and sat in the silence of her apartment and understood, with a clarity that was almost physical, that she had perhaps 18 months before her life in Seoul would be dismantled from 5,000 kilometers away unless she found a way to make it undismantleable. She threw herself into work. She picked up extra shifts at the clinic. She applied for an extension of her placement. She saved money with a discipline that surprised even herself, eating simply, spending almost nothing, watching the number in her bank account grow with the concentration of a woman who knew that money was not wealth but that in her specific situation it was something very close to freedom. It was at the clinic, 8 months later, that she first encountered the name Han. A patient had been brought in under considerable discretion, private entrance, no official registration under the family name, a personal doctor already in attendance who clearly wanted the clinic staff to do their work and ask no questions. Adaeze had been the nurse on duty. She had done her job with the professionalism she always brought to it, and she had not asked questions, because she understood that the wealthy in every country shared the particular anxiety of being seen as ordinary when they were vulnerable. The patient was a young man in his late 20s. He had suffered what appeared to be a severe anxiety episode compounded by prescription medication misuse. He was conscious but disoriented, and at one point, when his attending doctor had stepped out and Adaeze was checking his vitals, he had grabbed her wrist and said, in a voice that was simultaneously frightened and angry, "Don't tell my family. Please. Don't tell them I'm here." She had looked at him calmly and said, "I am only here to help you feel better. I am not here to tell anyone anything." He had released her wrist and looked at her with an expression she had seen before, in patients who expected coldness and received care instead, a kind of surprised, unguarded gratitude. His name, she would later find out, was Han Jun-ho. the younger cousin of Kim Seo-Jun. And the reason he had been brought to that particular clinic, in secret, at 2 in the morning, was that his family did not know he was struggling, and he was terrified of what would happen if they found out. Adaeze kept his secret. She was a nurse. Keeping patient confidences was not a favor, it was her professional and moral obligation. She did it without thinking about it, without attaching any significance to it, and she moved on. What she could not have known was that in the weeks that followed, Han Jun-ho, in his recovery and his gratitude, had told exactly one person about the nurse at the clinic in Mapo who had been kind to him without wanting anything in return. He had told this to his cousin, to Kim Seo-Jun. And Seo-Jun, who made it his business to remember everything, had remembered. So when, 14 months later, his legal team was quietly compiling a list of candidates for the most sensitive arrangement of his life, a contract surrogate marriage to satisfy the inheritance clause his grandfather had written into the family trust with the specific intention of forcing Seo-Jun to settle down, one name had come up in a way that was different from all the others. Not a name from Seoul's elite. Not a woman from a family who could use the arrangement as leverage. A foreigner. A nurse. A woman who had demonstrated, under pressure, that she could keep a secret and remain composed. His legal team had flagged it as an unusual choice. Seo-Jun had looked at the file for a long time and then said, simply, "Set up a meeting." Adaeze had been at the end of a double shift when the message came through. It came not to her phone but through the clinic's administrative system, a request for a private consultation, listed under a corporate wellness account, with a note from the clinic director that she specifically had been requested. She had assumed it was a referral. She had shown up to the meeting room in her uniform, expecting a patient or a family member, and had found instead a man in a charcoal suit sitting very still in a chair that he somehow made look like a throne. She recognized him. Not because they had met before, but because Kim Seo-Jun's face appeared in Korean business news with enough regularity that even someone who did not follow business news encountered it eventually. "Sit down," he said. "I prefer to stand until I know what this is about," she replied. He had looked at her for a moment, and something in him had recalibrated, almost imperceptibly. "Then I will stand too," he said, and rose from the chair. That was the first meeting. It lasted 40 minutes. He laid out the situation with the directness of a man who did not have time for indirection and had never had to learn it. The inheritance clause. The 6-month deadline. The board position he would lose to his uncle if he did not meet the condition. The contract he was proposing. The compensation, which was substantial enough that when he named the figure, Adaeze had to work to keep her expression neutral, because the number he said represented the specific sum she had calculated, in her most private and desperate moments, as the amount that would make her financially independent enough to resist her father's marriage arrangement for good. She had asked for 3 days to think about it. He had said he could give her 2. She had taken 2. And at the end of those 2 days, she had shown up to Han River Tower, taken the elevator to the 42nd floor, walked into the boardroom with the fabricated pregnancy report that his legal team had prepared and that she had reviewed and approved, and she had pushed it across the table. That was how it began. The week that followed the contract signing was the strangest of Adaeze's life, and her life had contained several weeks that competed for that title. She was given 48 hours to vacate her apartment in Mapo and move her belongings into the residential tower in Gangnam, where Seo-Jun maintained his primary Seoul residence. A car was sent for her. 2 staff members she had never met carried her boxes. She sat in the back of the vehicle watching her neighborhood recede through the tinted window and felt something she could not immediately name, something that was not quite grief and not quite fear but lived in the same neighborhood as both. The apartment, though calling it an apartment was like calling the Han River a stream, occupied the entire top floor of the building. It had 4 bedrooms, a chef's kitchen, a library, a room that appeared to be designated entirely for the storage and display of whiskey, and a view of Seoul that made the city look like something that had been arranged specifically for her benefit. A staff member named Lee showed her to her room, a guest suite with a bathroom larger than her previous apartment's living room, and informed her, with careful neutrality, that Mr. Kim's schedule for the following week included 3 public engagements at which her presence was required, and that a stylist would be arriving the following morning to begin preparation. Preparation for what? Adaeze asked. For your public presentation, Lee said, with the tone of a person who found the question slightly surprising. As his wife. Adaeze looked at herself in the mirror of the enormous bathroom that night for a long time. She was 29 years old. She was standing in a billionaire's penthouse in Seoul wearing a contract pregnancy she had agreed to perform. Her father was 4,000 miles away, negotiating her future with a man she had never met. And somewhere in this building, the man whose name was now legally attached to hers on a document that 41 pages of legal language had made binding, was doing whatever Kim Seo-Jun did when there were no boardrooms and no audiences. She turned off the bathroom light and went to bed. She did not sleep well. The stylist arrived at 8 the following morning, a small, precise Korean woman named Choi, who looked at Adaeze the way architects look at land they are about to build on. She circled her twice, made several notes on a tablet, and said, without unkindness but also without any particular warmth, "We have 2 weeks to develop your public presentation. You have good bone structure and excellent posture. We will work with what is here." "Thank you," Adaeze said drily. "The pregnancy silhouette will need to be managed carefully," Choi continued. "You are currently what, 10 weeks?" 12, Adaeze said, because that was what the document said. Choi nodded. "A small prosthetic insert for formal events, nothing dramatic at this stage. By month 5 we will need something more substantial, but that is months away. For now, the emphasis is on your overall image. The narrative the family is being presented with is that the marriage was quiet and private due to Mr. Kim's security concerns. The pregnancy confirms what they suspected, that there was a significant relationship they were not informed of. This narrative is already in circulation within the family through Mr. Kim's communications. Your job is simply to embody it convincingly." Adaeze absorbed this. "And if someone asks me something I don't know? About our relationship?" Choi smiled for the first time. It was a small, professional smile. "Mr. Kim's assistant will provide you with a relationship timeline document. Dates, locations, key memories. You will need to memorize it completely." That document arrived that afternoon. 12 pages. It described, in careful detail, a relationship that had never happened. How they had met at a private medical consultation that Seo-Jun had sought for stress-related symptoms, how they had maintained a discreet relationship over 14 months, how the pregnancy had been discovered 3 months ago and had accelerated a marriage they had already been discussing. Every detail was specific enough to be convincing and vague enough to be unverifiable. Adaeze read it twice. Then she did what she had done with her nursing board material, with her Korean language textbooks, with every piece of information she had ever needed to absorb under pressure. She read it again, this time aloud, quietly, to herself, until it stopped feeling like fiction and started feeling like something she could hold. She and Seo-Jun had their first real conversation, outside of the boardroom, outside of the legal framework, on the 3rd evening after she moved in. She had found him in the kitchen at 11 at night, standing at the counter eating cold rice from a container with a spoon, still in his work clothes, jacket removed, looking like a man who had forgotten, briefly, that he was performing anything. He looked up when she came in. Neither of them said anything for a moment. "You could not sleep," he said. It was not a question. "I slept," she said. "I just woke up." She went to the refrigerator and found the container of jollof rice she had made the previous afternoon. She had asked the kitchen staff if she could cook, and they had looked at her with an uncertainty that suggested no one had made that request before, and she had cooked anyway, because cooking was one of the ways she managed anxiety, and she had a great deal of anxiety to manage. She took her container and a fork and sat at the kitchen island, 2 stools away from him. He looked at her food. "What is that?" "Jollof rice," she said. "You cooked it?" "Yes." A pause. Then, unexpectedly, "What does it taste like?" She looked at him. In the low kitchen light, without the suit jacket, without the particular energy of performance that surrounded him in public spaces, he looked almost like a different person. Not softer exactly, but less armored. "Like home," she said. "But also like somewhere new. It depends on how you make it." He looked at his cold rice and then back at hers. She slid the container toward him fractionally, not an invitation exactly, more an acknowledgement that the option existed. He took a small amount on a clean spoon, tasted it, and was quiet for a moment. "It is good," he said. And then, as though the words surprised him slightly, "Thank you." They ate in silence for a while. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind of silence that happens between 2 people who are both tired of performing and have temporarily, in the privacy of a kitchen at midnight, agreed without speaking to stop. "I need to ask you something," she said eventually. "Go ahead." "Your cousin, Han Jun-ho. How is he?" Seo-Jun set his spoon down very carefully. "He is well," he said after a moment. "He has been living in Jeju for the last year. He is better." "Good," Adaeze said simply. "I am glad." He studied her face. "You never told anyone about that night?" "Of course not," she said, with a slight edge of surprise, as though the alternative had not occurred to her as a real possibility. "He was my patient. It was not my story to tell." Seo-Jun was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That is why you are here. That is why I chose you, specifically, out of everyone my legal team considered. Not because of your qualifications. Not because of your circumstances. Because of that night." Adaeze looked at him. "You chose me because I can keep a secret." "I chose you," he said, "because you kept a secret when there was no contract obligating you to. When you had no reason to. When keeping it gave you nothing." She thought about that. "That is a very cold way to value a person," she said. "Yes," he agreed. And he said it without apology or discomfort, with the simple honesty of a man who had decided, somewhere along the way, that honesty about his coldness was more respectful than warmth he did not feel. "But it is also why I trust you more than I have trusted anyone in this building in a very long time." She took her container back and stood up. "Good night, Seo-Jun," she said. "Good night, Adaeze," he replied. And it was the first time he had used her name. The first public appearance came on a Thursday. It was a private dinner hosted by one of the Han family's major shareholders, a man named Chairman Oh, at his residence in Hanamdong. 17 guests. Intimate by Seoul business elite standards. Intimate in the way that a surgical theater is intimate, everyone present, watching closely, evaluating every detail. Adaeze wore a navy dress selected by Choi, low-heeled shoes because she was already tall and Choi had advised against drawing additional attention to her height in early appearances, and a ring that Seo-Jun's assistant had placed in a velvet box on her dressing table that morning with a note that said only, "Left hand. Fourth finger." She had put it on and looked at it for a long moment. It was not ostentatious. It was elegant. A single oval stone in a simple band. The kind of ring chosen by someone who knew exactly what it was doing. They arrived together. Seo-Jun's hand went to the small of her back as they entered, not with affection, but with the precise, calibrated gesture of a man who understood optics down to the centimeter. She felt it and kept her face composed and thought, 12 pages. Memorized. You can do this. The first person to approach them was a woman in her 70s with silver hair and the kind of expression that had been refined by decades of social performance into something that looked like warmth and functioned like surveillance. Seo-Jun introduced her as Chairman Oh's wife, Mrs. Oh Soo-yeon. "So this is her," Mrs. Oh said, in Korean, looking at Adaeze with undisguised assessment. "We had all heard there was someone. We simply did not know the details." "The details were private," Seo-Jun said, pleasantly. "As we preferred." Mrs. Oh turned to Adaeze directly. "Your Korean is very good," she said, switching languages without warning, a test so transparent it was almost insulting. "Thank you," Adaeze said, in Korean. "I have worked hard at it. Seoul is not a city that rewards half measures." Mrs. Oh blinked, then smiled. A real one this time, small and surprised. "No," she agreed, "it is not." The dinner was 3 hours long. Adaeze smiled and answered questions and touched Seo-Jun's arm at appropriate moments and laughed at the right times and deflected personal questions with a kind of gracious vagueness that wealthy people in every country recognize and respect as a sign that you belong to the same world of deliberate privacy. She ate sparingly. Because the prosthetic insert under her dress required her to sit in a specific way and she was managing the logistics of it with a concentration she kept entirely off her face. In the car going home, Seo-Jun said nothing for 10 minutes. Then, "You were good tonight." "I know," she said. Not arrogantly. Just accurately. He almost smiled. She caught it in the window's reflection, the faintest compression at the corner of his mouth, and filed it away without comment. What she did not know, and would not know until later, was that someone had been watching the dinner from a position she had not accounted for. Not from inside the room, but from a photograph taken by a guest's personal assistant, sent that same evening to a number in Yongsan-gu. Han Mira had received it at 10:47 p.m. She had looked at it for a long time. The Nigerian woman was standing beside her nephew, And something about the way she stood, not clinging, not performing adoration, but composed and watchful and entirely self-possessed, troubled Han Mira in a way she could not immediately articulate. Most women who entered Seo-Jun's orbit, on the rare occasions they appeared publicly, performed a kind of careful deference. They angled themselves toward him. They consulted his expression before forming their own. They were women who understood that proximity to power required a certain degree of self-erasure. This woman was not erasing anything. She was standing in that room the same way she appeared to stand everywhere, like someone who had decided she had a right to be exactly where she was and had not left that decision open for renegotiation. Han Mira called her investigator. "What do we have from Nigeria?" she asked. "We are still working," he said. "Her father is a chief in Enugu. Significant connections. There appears to be a family situation, a marriage arrangement that was being discussed. She left for Seoul before it was finalized. The family has been quiet about it." "She was running," Mira said softly. "It looks that way. And the hospital, the clinic connection." A pause. "There is something there. We found a record, not official, but a source inside the clinic confirmed it. She was on duty the night Han Junho was brought in." The silence that followed was very long. "Are you certain?" Mira said. "Certain enough." Mira set the phone down. She sat very still in her chair and looked at the wall and thought about the particular mathematics of coincidence, how rare it actually was, and how frequently it was used as an explanation for things that were not coincidental at all. A Nigerian nurse who had been present at one of the Han family's most carefully buried moments of vulnerability, now appearing, with perfect timing, as the wife of the Han family heir. Pregnant, apparently. Married quietly. Presented to the family as a fait accompli. Han Mira had not spent 40 years protecting this family by believing in coincidence. She picked up the phone again. "I need you to go deeper," she said. "I need to know everything about that night at the clinic. And I need to know who authorized her residency extension. Someone paid for it. Find out who." She hung up and looked at the photograph again. The woman's face was turned slightly toward the camera, not aware of it, and in that unguarded angle, Han Mira could see something she recognized because she had felt it herself once, a very long time ago. It was the expression of someone carrying a secret that was heavier than they had anticipated when they agreed to carry it. "What are you hiding?" Mira whispered. And then, after a moment, she added something she had not planned to add. "And who is hiding it with you?" Inside the penthouse, Adaeze had changed out of the navy dress and removed the prosthetic insert and was sitting on the edge of her bed with her phone in her hands, looking at a message from her sister Chidinma that had come in at 9 that evening. It said, "Daddy is asking questions about Seoul. About why you renewed your contract again. Adaeze, whatever you are doing, please be careful. He is talking to the Okafor family again, and they are not patient people." She read it 3 times. Then she put the phone face down on the bed and lay back and stared at the ceiling. She was, she realized, now trapped from 2 directions. Behind her, in Enugu, a future she had not chosen was being constructed with or without her participation. Ahead of her, in Seoul, a performance she had agreed to was becoming more complicated with every passing day. And between those 2 forces, she was trying to exist as herself, Adaeze Nwokolo, from Enugu, who had come to Korea to build something of her own, in a life that was currently entirely composed of architecture she had not designed. She thought about what Seo-Jun had said in the kitchen, that he had chosen her because she could keep a secret when there was nothing binding her to it. She thought about what it meant that the same quality had, in some ways, made her useful to her father too, that she was reliable, controllable, the daughter who did not make public scenes, who managed her resistance quietly. She was tired, she realized, of being chosen for her capacity for silence. She closed her eyes. In the other wing of the penthouse, Kim Seo-Jun was sitting at his desk in the dark, not working, which was unusual. He was looking at his phone. On the screen was a message from his uncle, his father's brother, the man who stood to inherit the board position if Seo-Jun did not fulfill the grandfather's clause. The message was brief and cordial in the way that weapons are sometimes cordial, the cordiality of a person who knows they are winning. It said, "Congratulations on the marriage and the news. The family is looking forward to getting to know your wife properly. We hope she is everything you have represented her to be." Seo-Jun read it twice. Then he set the phone down and sat in the dark and thought about the specific quality of threat that wears a congratulatory suit. He had known, when he agreed to this arrangement, that it was dangerous. He had assessed the risk with the same analytical clarity he brought to acquisitions and mergers and hostile negotiations. He had identified the variables. He had built in protections where he could. He had chosen, with deliberate care, a partner who had already proven she could hold under pressure. What he had not accounted for, what he was finding in these first 2 weeks, that he had not factored into his risk assessment, was what it would feel like to share a living space with a person he had not chosen for any of the ordinary reasons people chose each other. He had not chosen her for attraction, though she was striking in a way he was aware of but had decided was not relevant. He had not chosen her for affection or familiarity or shared history. He had chosen her for her silence and her steadiness. And he was finding that silence and steadiness, in a person, over the course of ordinary daily existence, the kitchen at midnight, the drive home from a performance, the careful negotiation of shared spaces, were qualities that accumulated, that built up in the spaces between interactions like a structure being assembled from the inside. He did not examine this thought closely. He was not a man who examined such thoughts closely. He put the phone in his desk drawer and went to bed. But the thought remained, unexamined, somewhere below the surface of his carefully managed interior life, growing with the slow persistence of things that are ignored because they are inconvenient. The following morning, Han Mira arrived at the penthouse unannounced. This was, Adaeze would later understand, entirely intentional. A visit announced in advance gave a person time to prepare. Mira had no interest in a prepared version of this woman. She wanted the unrehearsed one. The housekeeper had let her in. Mira had a key, because of course she did. She had a key to every Han property because she had made it her business 30 years ago to be the person who held keys, and Adaeze had come out of her room in yoga pants and a sweatshirt, hair natural and unprocessed, face clean, to find a woman she had never met standing in the living room with the precise, still energy of a person taking inventory. They looked at each other. "You must be Adaeze," Han Mira said. "And you must be Seo-Jun's aunt," Adaeze replied, her voice showing nothing of the adrenaline that had just flooded her system. "Han Mira," the older woman said, extending her hand. Her grip was firm and held slightly too long. Another test, Adaeze recognized. The handshake as biometric reading. "Please sit down," Adaeze said, gesturing toward the living room with the composure of a woman in her own home, which she was not, and the confidence of a woman who refused to be caught at a disadvantage in someone else's, which she was. They sat. The housekeeper appeared with tea. Adaeze had not requested it, but did not show the surprise, and Mira poured for them both with the ease of someone comfortable in this space, establishing without words that she had prior claim to it. "You are very calm," Mira observed. "Should I not be?" Adaeze asked. "Most people are nervous when they meet me." "I imagine they are," Adaeze said. "You have a presence." Mira studied her. "You were a nurse before this." "I am still a nurse." "Marriage does not erase professional identity." "Of course not. I simply mean that your previous life was quite different from this one." She gestured at the apartment. "Many people's lives change," Adaeze said. "That is generally what living does." There was a brief silence. Mira picked up her tea. "How did you and my nephew meet?" she asked. Her tone was conversational. Interested. The tone of a woman who was genuinely curious and had no agenda whatsoever, which meant, Adaeze understood, that she had an agenda she did not want visible. "At a medical consultation," Adaeze said, because that was what the 12 pages said. "He came to the clinic where I worked. We spoke. We found we had reason to speak again." "Seo-Jun does not generally seek medical consultations," Mira said. "He has a private physician." "He did on this occasion," Adaeze said steadily. Another silence. Longer this time. Mira was looking at her with an expression that Adaeze could not fully read. Not hostile, not warm, but intensely attentive in a way that made the air feel slightly pressurized. "You are from Enugu," Mira said. Adaeze felt something she did not show. "Yes." "Your father is Chief Emeka Nwokolo." "Yes." "A man of significant standing." "He would agree with you." Mira set down her tea. "Then it is interesting," she said, very carefully, "that a woman from a family of that standing came to Seoul, extended her nursing placement not once but twice, and appears to have had no contact with her family's marriage arrangements in over a year. The sentence landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Adaeze watched the ripples and kept her face entirely still. "Family relationships are complicated," she said. "In every culture." "They are," Mira agreed pleasantly. "And they tend to become more complicated when a great deal of money and inheritance is involved. In any culture." They looked at each other across the low table. Two women. Two sets of secrets. One room. "I look forward to knowing you better," Mira said, standing and straightening her jacket. "I hope we will have many opportunities to speak." She left. Adaeze sat where she was for 4 minutes after the door closed, breathing slowly, letting the adrenaline metabolize. Then she picked up her phone and sent Seo-Jun a message. It said, "Your aunt was here. She knows about my family in Nigeria. She is investigating." His reply came in 40 seconds. "I know. I will handle it." She looked at those 4 words for a long moment. Then she typed back, "This is not something you can handle alone. We need to talk." His reply took longer this time. Nearly 3 minutes. Then, "Tonight. Kitchen. 11. She put the phone down and looked out at Seoul spread below her in the afternoon light, enormous and indifferent, and felt, for the first time since she had signed that contract, genuinely afraid. Not of Mira specifically. Not of exposure specifically. Afraid of the growing suspicion that she had entered an arrangement she had believed was simple and contained, and that it was neither, and that the walls of it were closer than she had measured, and were moving. She took a breath. She thought about Chidinma's message. She thought about her father's voice on the phone, the voice of a man informing. She thought about Han Junho's face in the clinic, frightened and young, saying, "Please don't tell them I'm here." She had kept that secret. She had kept that secret because it was the right thing to do, because he was her patient, because people deserved to be protected in their vulnerability. But it was that secret, she was now understanding, that had brought her here. And somewhere in this story, she felt with a certainty she could not yet explain, that secret was not finished. That it was, in fact, the center of everything. And that when it finally came fully to light, it would change every calculation that everyone in this arrangement had made. She sat with that feeling and let it settle. Then she stood up, went to the kitchen, and began to cook. Because it was what she did when the world required managing, and the world, right now, required a great deal of it. Outside in the corridor, the housekeeper was folding linens and pretending not to have noticed that a woman had just sat completely still for 4 minutes after a visit from the most feared member of the Han family, and that her hands, for those 4 minutes, had been perfectly steady. The housekeeper, who had worked in Han properties for 11 years, had seen many things. But she had never seen anyone sit that still after meeting Han Mira. She filed it away, the way she filed many things, quietly, without comment. And she went back to her folding. The kitchen at 11 was becoming, without either of them naming it, a kind of institution. Adaeze was already there when Seo-Jun arrived, sitting at the island with a cup of tea she was not drinking, still in the sweatshirt she had worn when Mira came, because she had not felt like performing anything for the rest of the day, and the sweatshirt was the physical expression of that decision. She had cooked earlier, a pot of egusi soup that was now sitting covered on the stove because she had needed something to do with her hands and her mind simultaneously, and cooking was the only activity she knew that demanded enough of both to quiet the noise between them. Seo-Jun came in without his jacket, which she was learning was his version of the same thing. The jacket was the armor. Without it he was still composed, still careful, but the particular energy of performance was dialed down to something more sustainable. He looked at the pot on the stove. "You cooked again," he said. "It helps me think," she said. He sat down across from her and folded his hands on the surface of the island and looked at her with the expression she was beginning to recognize as his listening face. Not warm, not cold, simply fully present in a way that most people were not capable of, the full weight of his attention directed at you like a lamp turned to its highest setting. "Tell me everything," she said, he said. "Exactly," Adaeze told him. She went through the visit with the precision of a woman who had been trained to observe and document. The handshake held too long, the tea poured without being asked, the comment about the nursing placement extensions, the mention of her father's name. She did not editorialize. She laid it out the way she would have documented a patient's condition, factually, in sequence, with the details that mattered separated from the ones that did not. When she finished, Seo-Jun was quiet for a moment. She mentioned your father by name, he said. Yes. That means she has already been talking to people in Nigeria. Not just researching from here. She has a contact on the ground. I assumed that, Adaeze said. How long has she known about me? Before the dinner. She knew a woman existed within 48 hours of the contract signing, he said. I expected that. Mira has sources in my legal team, not a leak exactly, but she has relationships with people who owe her things, and information moves. I did not expect her to move to Nigeria this quickly. She is fast. She is thorough, he corrected. There is a difference. Fast people miss things. Mira does not miss things. Adaeze looked at him. Then we need to talk about what she is going to find. The sentence sat between them. Seo-Jun did not look away from it. She is going to find, Adaeze continued carefully, that I was on duty the night Han Junho was brought to the clinic. She may already know that. Her investigator told her there was something at the clinic. That was in her voice when she mentioned the nursing placement. She was not asking about the extension itself. She was asking about what happened during it. Yes, Seo-Jun said. Which means, Adaeze said, that the story we have built, the story about a medical consultation, about how we met, is going to develop a problem. Because if she traces the clinic connection to Junho, she is going to understand very quickly that the consultation was not mine with you. It was his. And from that point, the questions become very different questions. Seo-Jun was quiet in a way that was not the silence of a man who had not considered this. It was the silence of a man who had considered it thoroughly and had been hoping the timeline would give him more room. How much room do we have? She asked. 2 weeks, he said. Maybe 3. Mira is systematic. She will not come to me with a theory. She will come with evidence. She needs to build the full picture first, which takes time. But she is building it. Adaeze nodded slowly. Then we have 2 weeks to decide what we do when she arrives with it. Yes. And what do we do? He looked at her directly. That depends on something I need to ask you. She waited. Junho, he said, and the name came out with a weight behind it that she had not heard in his voice before, something that was not quite vulnerability but lived close to it. He is not just my cousin. He is the only person in this family who has never wanted anything from me, who has never positioned himself, who has never used proximity to me as a strategy. He is 26 years old, and he spent 3 years believing that the only way to survive in this family was to disappear into whatever substance made the pressure manageable, and he almost did not come back from that. I spent a significant amount of money and a significant amount of careful management ensuring that his episode at the clinic remained buried. Not for the family's reputation. For him. Because if it became known, the way this family handles shame would have finished what the medication started. He said all of this in the same level, measured tone he used for everything. But Adaeze, who had become, over 2 weeks, a careful reader of the register beneath his tone, heard what it was carrying. I understand, she said quietly. If Mira connects you to that night, she will also connect it to the fact that I knew about it. And she will understand, correctly, that the reason I knew about it is that Junho told me. Which means she will go to Junho. And she will not be gentle about it. What would she do with it? Use it, he said simply. Not publicly. Mira does not operate publicly. She would use it as leverage over Junho to extract information about our arrangement. And Junho, who is gentle and has not yet fully rebuilt the armor that people in this family require, would break. Adaeze was quiet for a moment. So we need to get to Junho before she does, she said. Something shifted in Seo-Jun's expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the particular look of a man who has spent a long time solving problems alone and has just been reminded, unexpectedly, that another person is in the room. That is what I have been thinking, he said. Then why are you sitting here looking like a man who has not yet decided? She asked, with a directness that she had long since stopped moderating for his benefit. Call him. Tonight. Tell him what is happening. Do not let Mira be the first voice he hears. If I call him tonight, he will know that the situation is more serious than I have let him believe. I have kept him away from all of this deliberately. He is doing well in Jeju. I do not want to pull him back into the machinery of this family. Seo-Jun, Adaeze said, and she said his name in the way that nurses say things to patients who are being careful with the wrong information, directly, without cruelty, but without softness either. He is already in the machinery. He has been in it since the night he was brought to that clinic. The machinery does not stop existing because you do not tell him it is moving. It only means he gets caught in it without warning. The silence that followed was long enough that Adaeze heard the city outside, distant traffic, something that might have been wind, the specific nighttime quality of Seoul that was never entirely quiet. "You are right," he said finally. "I know," she said. And then, because she was tired and the day had been long and she was allowed, in the kitchen at 11, to be slightly more human than the performance required, she added, "It is not a weakness to protect someone by telling them the truth. It only feels that way when you have spent your whole life in a family where information is the primary currency and giving it away feels like loss." He looked at her for a moment in a way she could not fully categorize. Then he reached for his phone. "I will call him," he said. "But not tonight. It is late and Jun-ho does not do well with late-night calls. They bring him back to a place I do not want him revisiting. Tomorrow morning." "All right," she said. She stood and took her tea to the sink and rinsed the cup and set it on the drying rack. Then she turned and looked at him, still sitting at the island with his phone in his hand, the city glittering behind him through the glass. "The soup is on the stove," she said. "If you are hungry." She went to bed. She did not hear whether he ate it. But in the morning, when she came to the kitchen at 7, the pot had been served from a single bowl, washed and left on the rack beside her cup. She looked at it for a moment. Then she put the kettle on and began her day. Seo-Jun called Jun-ho at 8:15 from his office, with the door closed. Adaeze did not hear the conversation and did not ask about it. But at 9:40, Seo-Jun came out of his office and found her in the living room with a medical journal she had been reading without absorbing, and he said, without preamble, "He is coming to Seoul. Day after tomorrow. I want you to be here when he arrives." She looked up. "Why?" "Because he asked about you," Seo-Jun said, with a slight quality in his voice that she could not entirely read. "He said, and I am giving you his exact words, he said, 'Is she the one? The nurse from that night?' And when I told him yes, he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, 'I want to meet her properly. I want to thank her properly.'" Adaeze looked back at her journal. "All right," she said. "He also said something else," Seo-Jun said, and now his voice had a different quality. More careful, more considered, the voice of a man delivering information he is not sure how to frame. "He said that he had told someone else. About that night. About the nurse who helped him." Adaeze felt something drop in her chest. She kept her face arranged. "Who?" "His therapist," Seo-Jun said. "Which is not a problem in itself. Therapist confidentiality. But his therapist in Jeju was arranged through a medical network that has a connection to a clinic group that is part-owned by a subsidiary of one of my uncle's holding companies." The room was very quiet. "You think the uncle's people have access to the therapy records," Adaeze said. "I think it is possible that someone has been monitoring Jun-ho's recovery through a channel I was not aware of," Seo-Jun said. "I think my uncle has known for some time that there is something at the clinic in Mapo that I do not want surfaced. And I think he may have shared that information with Mira, or Mira may have shared it with him, or they have been operating in coordination on this from the beginning." Adaeze set the journal down. "So it is not just Mira," she said. "It may never have been just Mira," he said. They looked at each other across the living room, the city behind him, bright and enormous in the morning light, and between them a silence that had changed quality again, had become something heavier and more honest than the silences that had come before it. "You did not account for your uncle when you built this arrangement," she said. "Not an accusation. A fact. I underestimated the coordination between them," he said. Which, she understood, was the closest thing to an admission of error that Kim Seo-Jun was capable of producing. "Then we need to think bigger than Mira," she said. "And we need to do it before Jun-ho arrives, because once he is here, he becomes a variable we cannot fully control, and if your uncle's people are watching his movements, his coming to Seoul will tell them that something has shifted." Seo-Jun nodded slowly. "What are you thinking?" She stood up and went to the window and looked at Seoul for a moment, the river in the distance, silver even in daylight, cutting through everything. "I am thinking," she said, "that we have been playing defense. responding to what Mira finds, worrying about what your uncle knows, waiting for the next move. And defense is a losing position when the other side has more resources and more time. She turned to look at him. We need to find something. Something that changes the balance. Something that makes the cost of coming after this arrangement higher than the benefit. Seo-Jun was very still. You are talking about leverage. I am talking about survival, she said. Which sometimes looks like the same thing. The words settled in the room between them, and neither of them moved away from it. It was Seo-Jun who spoke first. There is something, he said. Something I have known about for a long time and have not used because using it would mean a kind of war I was not sure I wanted to fight. Tell me, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, my uncle's holding company. The one with the subsidiary connected to Junho's clinic network. 7 years ago, that company was involved in a land acquisition in the south of the country, a development project that required the relocation of a small community. The relocation was handled in a way that was not legal. Documents were falsified. Compensation that was supposed to reach the affected families was redirected. There are people who were displaced and never properly compensated, and there are records of it, not in the official company filings, but in internal communications that I have had in my possession for 4 years. Adaeze looked at him. Why have you not used it? Because using it means destroying him, Seo-Jun said. And he is my father's brother. And I was raised to believe that certain things were not done within the family, regardless of what the family did. And now, she said. He looked at her steadily. Now I have a wife, he said, who is carrying my child, according to the story we have told every person in this family and this city. And if that story collapses, it does not only collapse for me. It collapses for you. And you did not sign up for collapse. She held his gaze. No, she said. I signed up for 6 months and a number that would change my life. And I intend to get to the end of those 6 months. Then we use it, he said. But carefully. Not as a public disclosure. As a private communication. To my uncle. So that he understands that the cost of escalating this campaign against our arrangement is a reckoning he does not want. And Mira, he said, and something in his expression shifted, something that was not quite pain but acknowledged its existence, is more complicated. Because Mira is not motivated by the company or the board position. She is motivated by something else entirely. What? Adaeze asked. He was quiet for a long moment. She loved my father, he said. Her brother. More than anyone in this family has loved anyone, I think. He died 4 years ago, and when he died, the way she managed that grief was to transfer it entirely into the protection of his legacy. Which means into the protection of me. Which means that everything she is doing right now, the investigation, the visits, the questions, she believes she is doing for me. To protect me from a woman she suspects is using me. Adaeze absorbed this slowly. She is not your enemy, she said. No, he said. That is the problem. She is the most dangerous kind of opponent, a person who genuinely believes they are on your side. The day Junho arrived in Seoul was a Tuesday, gray and warm with the particular humidity of early summer that made the city feel closer than usual, the buildings pressing in at the edges. He came to the penthouse in the late afternoon, brought up by Lee, and he stood in the entrance hall looking slightly younger than 26, wearing a linen shirt and carrying a canvas bag and looking around the apartment with the expression of a person returning to a world they had worked hard to leave. Adaeze was in the living room. She rose when he came in. They looked at each other for a moment. He was taller than she had remembered from the clinic, but then she had only seen him horizontal, which collapses a person. He had the same bone structure as Seo-Jun but softer, less armored, the face of someone who had not yet fully decided what expression to wear permanently. His eyes, when they met hers, were immediately and unmistakably genuine. You remember me, she said. It was not a question. I remember everything about that night, he said. I remember that you checked my blood pressure twice because the first reading worried you. I remember that you adjusted the foreline because the first nurse had placed it at an angle that would have caused bruising. I remember that when I grabbed your wrist, you did not pull away. You just waited until I was ready to let go. Adaeze said nothing. There was nothing required. I never got to thank you, he said. Seo-Jun told me you had moved. I did not know how to find you. You did not need to find me, she said. I was doing my job. You were doing more than your job, he said, with a quiet certainty. Then he looked around the apartment again, and a small, complicated smile came over his face. And now you are here. Which is either the most extraordinary coincidence or the most Seo-Jun thing that has ever happened. Adaeze almost smiled. Which do you think it is? Seo-Jun does not believe in coincidence, Junho said. And he does not do anything without a reason he has thought about from 17 different angles. He looked at her directly. Which means he chose you deliberately. Which means he trusts you with something he does not trust many people with. He paused. I just want to know if you are all right. In this. Whatever this is. She looked at him for a long moment. At his open face, his careful eyes, the particular quality of a person who had been to a very dark place and come back from it with a tenderness that suffering sometimes produces in people who survive it with their empathy intact. I am managing, she said honestly. That is a nurse's answer, he said. I am a nurse, she replied. He nodded slowly. If it becomes more than managing, he said, you can tell me. I know that probably sounds strange, coming from someone you barely know. But I have very little left to lose in terms of what people in this family think of me, which makes me, I think, one of the safer people to talk to. She thought about Seo-Jun saying he is the only person in this family who has never wanted anything from me. She thought about what it meant that this young man, who had almost not come back from his own darkness, had walked into this apartment and immediately asked if she was all right, before asking anything else. Thank you, she said. And she meant it simply and completely. Seo-Jun arrived home at 6. The three of them ate together in the dining room. Adaeze had cooked again, a pepper soup this time because the day had felt like it needed something that demanded attention to eat, and the conversation was careful at first, calibrated, and then gradually something loosened, the way it does when three people realize simultaneously that the performance is not serving any of them. Junho asked Adaeze about Enugu, about Nigeria, about what it had been like to arrive in Seoul alone, and he listened to her answers with the quality of attention that belongs to people who have spent time in therapy and learned, genuinely, how to be present in a conversation. Seo-Jun was quieter than usual, watching them both with an expression that Adaeze could not read but felt, in some ways she could not articulate, was not entirely businesslike. After dinner, while Adaeze cleared the table, she insisted, because the kitchen staff had the evening off and she was not the kind of person who left a mess for someone else to return to, the two cousins moved to the living room and she heard their voices, low and serious, the conversation shifting into something more private. She did not listen. She washed the dishes with the careful attention she gave to everything, and she thought about leverage and timing and the particular mathematics of a situation where every variable was connected to every other variable, and what it meant to be the person standing at the center of it, holding things together with the same steady hands that had once adjusted an 4-line in a dark clinic room for a frightened young man who had asked her not to tell anyone he was there. She was still thinking when Junho appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Can I help?" he asked. "It is almost done," she said. He came in anyway and dried the dishes she passed him with the unself-conscious ease of someone comfortable in kitchens, and they worked in silence for a few minutes, and then he said, "He told me about Mira. About what she has found." "I know," she said. "She came to Jeju," he said quietly. 2 weeks ago. I did not tell Seo-Jun because I did not want to worry him." Adaeze went very still. She kept drying the bowl in her hands, but her full attention contracted to a single point. "What did she say?" "She was kind," he said. "She is always kind to me. That is the thing about Mira. She genuinely loves me. She asked about my health, my routine, whether I was happy. And then, at the end, she asked, very gently, about the clinic in Mapo. She said she had heard I had been there, and she only wanted to know that I was truly all right, and that no one had taken advantage of my situation." "And what did you tell her?" "I told her the truth," he said. "That I had been there, and that a nurse had been kind to me, and that I had not told anyone who I was." He paused. "I did not tell her who the nurse was. I did not tell her your name. I only said that a nurse had helped me and that I had always been grateful." "But Adaeze." He set down the dish he was holding and turned to look at her. "She already knew your name. She said it. She said, was it the nurse Adaeze? And she was watching my face when she said it." The kitchen was very quiet. "What did your face do?" Adaeze asked. "Enough," he said. "I tried to control it, but she is very fast, and I have never been as good at this as Seo-Jun. She saw something. I do not know what she did with it." Adaeze set down the bowl. She dried her hands slowly on the kitchen towel. She thought about 2 weeks and how quickly it had become 1 week and would soon become less. "Does Seo-Jun know she went to Jeju?" she asked. "I just told him. In the living room." "He is." Jun-ho paused. "He is managing it." Which meant, Adaeze understood, that Seo-Jun was sitting in the living room engaged in the internal equivalent of a controlled demolition, taking apart what he had built and rebuilding it around the new information, quickly and without visible distress. "All right," she said. She folded the towel and placed it on the counter and walked to the living room. Seo-Jun was sitting where she expected, hands folded, looking at the city, the controlled stillness of a man doing very rapid internal work. She sat across from him. "How bad?" she asked. "Mira knows you are the nurse from that night," he said. "She has known for at least 2 weeks. She has been sitting on it." "Why?" "Because she does not have the full connection yet," he said. "She knows you were there. She knows Jun-ho was there. She suspects the connection between those 2 facts and the contract. But she is missing the middle. She does not yet know how I found you, or how the arrangement was formalized, or what the terms are. She is waiting for the piece that ties it all together." "What is that piece?" He looked at her. "The legal team," he said. "Specifically, the paralegal who compiled the initial candidate list. The one who flagged your name. Mira has a relationship with him that I was not aware of until tonight, when Jun-ho told me something he remembered, a detail about the night Mira came to Jeju. She mentioned a name that belongs to someone in my legal team." He paused. "Someone who may have been providing her information from the beginning." The sentence landed in the room like a door closing. "You have a leak," Adaeze said. "I have had a leak," he said, "from the start." They sat with that. Outside, Seoul moved with its tremendous indifferent energy, 10 million lives proceeding in parallel, none of them aware of this particular room, this particular silence, these 2 people sitting across from each other in the middle of an unraveling that had been built into the architecture of the thing from the moment it began. "Then everything Mira knows," Adaeze said slowly. "She knows because someone inside your legal team has been telling her." "Yes." "Which means she may know more than we think she knows." "Yes." "Which means the 2 weeks we thought we had may already be up," he said. Jun-ho appeared in the doorway of the living room. He looked between them with the expression of a young man who had survived enough to recognize the quality of a serious silence. "What do we do?" he asked. And it was Adaeze who answered. Not because it was her place, not because she had been designated the strategist of this particular operation, but because she was, at her core, a nurse, a person trained to assess a situation clearly in the moment of its worst pressure and identify what action was required right now, in this moment, before the next thing happened. "We stop waiting for Mira to come to us," she said. "We go to her." Both men looked at her. "We go to her," she continued, "and we tell her the truth. Not all of it, but enough. Enough that she does not hear the rest of it first from someone who will frame it against us." She looked at Seo-Jun. "You said she is not your enemy. You said she believes she is protecting you. Then let her protect you. Give her something real to protect you with. Give her a version of the truth that is true enough to satisfy her and does not destroy what we are trying to build." Seo-Jun was very still. "If I go to Mira," he said carefully, "and I tell her that the marriage is real." "The marriage is legal," Adaeze said. "I am your wife." "That is not a lie." "If I tell her that the pregnancy—" "Do not tell her anything about the pregnancy," Adaeze said. "You tell her about the clinic. You tell her that you found out about Jun-ho through the nurse on duty, that it was through that knowledge that you met me, that you pursued me because you trusted someone who had proven they could be trusted, and that you married me because you made a decision and you stand by your decisions." She paused. "All of that is true." Jun-ho made a soft sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh caught before it fully formed. Seo-Jun looked at her for a long moment. "You are asking me to give Mira a true story that omits the contract." "I am asking you to give Mira a true story that centers the person, not the transaction, she said. Because Mira is not concerned about the transaction. She is concerned about whether you are being used. Show her that you are not being used. Show her a man who made a choice, a deliberate, considered choice, for reasons she can understand, and she will stand down. And if she asks about the inheritance clause? Tell her the timing was fortunate, Adaeze said. It was. It is not a lie. The silence was long. Then Seo-Jun said, "This requires you to perform something in front of Mira that you have not been asked to perform before." "What?" she said. "Not a wife," he said. "A woman who chose this. Voluntarily. Who is not here because of a contract or a calculation, but because she wanted to be." He held her gaze. "That is a different performance from the one you have been giving. And it requires something from you that the contract did not include in its terms." Adaeze held his gaze for a moment. "I understand what it requires," she said. "Do you?" he said, and there was something in his voice, quiet, almost careful, that was different from anything she had heard from him before. Not businesslike. Not analytical. Something that sat below the register of strategy entirely. She looked at him. And she thought about the bowl on the drying rack that morning. She thought about the way he had stood up in the first meeting when she said she preferred to stand. She thought about the kitchen and the jollof rice and the word good night said in a way that carried something that had not been contracted for. "Yes," she said. "I do." Junho was looking at the ceiling with the studied neutrality of a young man who has suddenly found himself present at something that is no longer about him and is handling it with great tact. "I will arrange a dinner," Seo-Jun said. "With Mira. This week." "Good," Adaeze said. She stood. She looked at Junho. "The guest room at the end of the hall has the best light in the morning," she said. "There is extra bedding in the cupboard on the left." "Thank you," he said, and his eyes were warm and slightly complicated. She went to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at her hands, the same hands that had steadied 4 lines and taken blood pressures and held wrists in the dark of clinic rooms without pulling away. She thought about what Seo-Jun had said. That it required something from her the contract had not included. She thought about whether that was true. She thought about whether it had been true for longer than tonight. And she thought about Han Mira, sitting in her townhouse in Yongsan-gu, with a photograph and an investigator and 40 years of protecting a family, holding the almost complete shape of a truth that she had been assembling piece by piece, and what it would mean when the last piece arrived. Because it would arrive. Adaeze knew that with the certainty of someone who had sat with enough situations to know that incomplete things do not stay incomplete. The world finishes them. One way or another, the world finishes them. The question was who would be standing in the room when it did. She lay back and looked at the ceiling and listened to Seoul outside the window, enormous, indifferent, entirely certain of itself, and she thought about Chidinma's message and her father's voice and the Okafor family who were not patient people, and she thought about how many directions a person could be pulled before something gave. And then she stopped thinking and simply breathed, slowly and deliberately, the way she had learned to do in the hardest moments of nursing training when the situation was beyond your management and the only thing left was to remain present in it, steady, until something shifted. Something always shifted. The dinner with Han Mira was set for Thursday. On Wednesday evening, Adaeze received a phone call from a number she did not recognize. She almost did not answer. She was at the kitchen island reviewing the relationship timeline document, running through it again, tightening her recall, preparing for Thursday with the same discipline she brought to everything. She answered on the 4th ring. The voice on the other end was male. Nigerian. Speaking Igbo before switching to English. The combination of languages that her father used when he wanted to make sure she understood that what was being said was not for outsiders. "Miss Adaeze," the voice said, "I am calling on behalf of Chief Nwokolo. Your father wants you to know that the Okafor family's representative will be in Seoul next week. They have business there. Your father wanted you to be aware." She set the relationship timeline document down very carefully. "Why," she said, in a voice she kept entirely level, "would the Okafor family have business in Seoul?" "I am only passing the message," the voice said. "Tell my father," she said, "that I received the message." She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and looked at the city through the glass and understood, with a completeness that arrived all at once, that the wall she had believed existed between her life in Seoul and her life in Enugu had never been a wall. It had always been a door. And her father, patient and methodical and entirely certain of his own authority, had simply been waiting for the right moment to open it. The Okafor family in Seoul. Next week. The week of the dinner with Mira. The week that Jun-ho was here. The week that the leak in Seo-Jun's legal team was active and Mira was one piece of information away from the full picture. It was too much coincidence for coincidence. She stood up and walked to Seo-Jun's office and knocked. "Come in," he said. She opened the door. He was at his desk, working, and he looked up with the attentiveness he brought to unexpected interruptions. Not irritated, just recalibrating. "My father is sending someone to Seoul," she said. "A representative of the family he wants me to marry. They will be here next week." The room was very quiet. Seo-Jun set his pen down. "Your father knows you are here," he said. It was not a question. "My father has always known I am here," she said. "What he did not know until recently, I suspect, is who I am here with." She looked at him steadily. "Someone told him. The same way someone told Mira. I think it is possible, Seo-Jun, that the leak in your legal team has been speaking to more than one interested party." He looked at her for a long moment, and she watched something move through his expression. Not panic, because Kim Seo-Jun did not panic. It was not in his architecture, but a recalibration that was deeper and more significant than the one she had seen before. "Sit down," he said. "I prefer to stand," she said, and she said it without thinking, and then she heard it, and something in her expression shifted. He heard it too, and something in his, very briefly, too quickly to fully name, did the same. "They are coordinating," he said. "Yes," she said. "Your father and my uncle." "Possibly," she said. "Or separately, through the same intermediary, arriving at the same outcome. Which amounts to the same thing. They both want this arrangement to fail," he said. "My father does not know there is an arrangement," she said. "He only knows his daughter is in Seoul, living with a man, and not coming home. For him, the outcome he wants is me on a plane back to Enugu before the Okafor family loses patience. The method is secondary. And my uncle wants the board position," Seo-Jun said. "Which requires the inheritance clause to remain unfulfilled. Which requires this marriage to be revealed as fraudulent." "So one of them wants me gone," Adaeze said. "And one of them wants the marriage exposed. And if both things happen simultaneously—" "Everything collapses simultaneously," he said. She nodded. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that she did not expect. "I am sorry," he said. She looked at him. "I am sorry that I brought you into something I did not fully understand," he said. "I assessed the risk. I was thorough. I believed I had accounted for the variables." A pause. "I did not account for your father. I did not account for the possibility that your life outside this arrangement had forces moving in it that would intersect with the forces moving in mine. I treated you as a contained element in a controlled situation. You are not. You are a person with a family and a history and a set of pressures that existed before I asked you to sit across from me in a boardroom, and those pressures did not suspend themselves because of a contract." Adaeze looked at him for a long moment. At the man behind the charcoal suit and the controlled expression and the 41 pages of legal language. At the man who ate cold rice alone at 11 at night and stood up in a room because someone said they preferred to stand. "No," she said quietly. "They did not. I cannot undo the situation," he said. "But I want you to know that I am aware of what I asked you to carry. And I am aware that it has become heavier than either of us intended." She held his gaze. "Thursday," she said. "We manage Thursday. Then we manage the Okafor representative. One thing at a time." "One thing at a time," he agreed. She turned to leave. "Adaeze," he said. She stopped. "If you wanted to leave," he said carefully, "the contract has provisions." "I would not," he paused. "I would honor whatever you needed." She stood with her back to him for a moment. Then she turned, and she looked at him with an expression that was not in any of the 12 pages, that had not been prepared or rehearsed or calibrated for any audience. That was simply the face of a woman who had made a decision and knew, somewhere below the level of strategy, why she was making it. "I am not leaving," she said. She went back to the kitchen. She picked up the relationship timeline document. She read it once more. And then she set it aside, because she understood, sitting in that kitchen in that penthouse in that city that was no longer entirely foreign, that the story she would tell Han Mira on Thursday was not the one on those 12 pages. It was something closer to the truth. Not the whole truth. Not the contract, not the fabrication, not the careful architecture of a 6-month performance. But the part that was real, that a woman had helped a young man in a dark room and asked for nothing. That a man had remembered it. That something had been built, improbably, in the space between strategy and the kitchen at 11 at night, between cold rice and egusi soup, between a handshake and a door opened without knocking. Something that did not have a clean name yet. Something that was not finished. She was still sitting with that thought when her phone lit up on the counter with a message. Not from Chidinma. Not from Seo-Jun. From a number she had never seen before. A Korean number, local, unregistered. The message said, "I know what the document says. I know what the clinic visit was for. I think you should know that I am not the only one who knows. Meet me before Thursday or the dinner will not go the way you are planning." It was not signed. Adaeze read it 3 times. Then she set the phone face up on the counter and looked at it and thought about walls that were never walls, about doors that had always been doors, about how a secret shared between 2 people is never really a secret at all. It is a weight distributed across 2 sets of hands, and what happens when one set of hands decides, for reasons of their own, to let go. She thought about Jun-ho asleep in the room at the end of the hall. She thought about the therapist in Jeju. She thought about the paralegal. She thought about her father's voice on the phone, the voice of a man informing. And then she picked up the phone and typed 3 words back to the unknown number. Where and when. She pressed send. And outside, Seoul went on being Seoul, enormous, indifferent, entirely unconcerned with the particular story unfolding on its 42nd floor, or its penthouse, or its kitchen counter at night. But inside this apartment, in this city, at this specific moment in the life of a woman who had come here to build something of her own, something was shifting. Something was, finally and irrevocably, beginning. And nothing that came after it would look like anything that had come before. If you have made it to the end of this story, then you already know what kind of viewer you are, the kind who stays. The kind who feels the weight of a room even when they are not in it, who hears what is said between the lines and sits with the parts that are not yet resolved, because they understand that the best stories are not the ones that end cleanly. They are the ones that leave something behind. Something that stays with you after you close the tab or put down the phone or turn off the light. If this story left something with you, a feeling, a question, a character you cannot stop thinking about, then let me know in the comments. Tell me who you are watching for. Tell me which room you would have stayed in and which one you would have walked out of. Tell me where in the world you are reading this from, because these stories travel in ways that still amaze me, and knowing where you are is one of the small, genuine privileges of doing this. Until we continue, take care of yourself. Take care of the people in your orbit. And if you are carrying something heavy right now, I hope you are not carrying it alone.